You are sitting in a dentist's chair, the light is in your face, the drill is ready, and the dentist says the same thing they have said to you before. You have a cavity. Global tooth decay affects approximately 3.5 billion people right now. It is the single most widespread chronic disease on the planet, more common than diabetes, more common than asthma, more common than heart disease. The global dental industry generates over $160 billion a year treating it. And every single one of us accepts this as normal, as just part of being human. But here is the thing. It is not. Archaeologists have examined thousands of ancient human skulls, spanning hundreds of thousands of years. And for most of human history, the teeth inside those skulls were nearly perfect. No cavities, no decay, no evidence of the chronic dental destruction that defines modern life. Something changed. Something specific, something documented. And it happened at a moment in history we can identify almost exactly. This is the story of how humans gave themselves the worst teeth in the animal kingdom, and why it happened.
Let's start with the skulls. Researchers studying pre-agricultural human remains consistently find the same thing. Teeth that are worn down from years of chewing tough raw and cooked food, but structurally intact. A study of hunter-gatherer populations across multiple continents found cavity rates of less than 2%. 2%. Compare that to modern industrialized populations where cavity rates in adults regularly exceed 90% over a lifetime. This is not a small difference. This is a complete transformation of the human mouth. And to understand why it happened, you need to understand one specific bacterium. Streptococcus mutans. This is the organism primarily responsible for tooth decay. It lives in your mouth right now. It feeds on fermentable carbohydrates. When you eat sugar or refined starch, Streptococcus mutans consumes it and produces acid as a byproduct. That acid dissolves tooth enamel. That dissolved enamel is a cavity. The process is simple, well-documented, and completely understood. What is less understood is why it became so universal. Because Streptococcus mutans did not suddenly evolve. It was always there. What changed was what we were feeding it. For the vast majority of human existence, the human diet was brutally varied. Meat, fish, roots, berries, nuts, leaves, insects. Almost none of it was fermentable in the way that feeds decay bacteria. Meat does not feed Streptococcus mutans. Most vegetables do not feed it. Nuts do not feed it. Even natural sugars from whole fruit, embedded in fiber, are processed by the body differently than free sugars. And here is something that consistently surprises people. Hunter-gatherers ate almost no grain. Not because grain didn't exist. Wild grasses have been on this planet far longer than we have. But processing grain into edible food requires grinding, soaking, or fermenting, all of which are labor-intensive processes that hunter-gatherer groups did only occasionally. The Hadza people of Tanzania, who still largely follow a pre-agricultural lifestyle, have been studied extensively. Their teeth show remarkably low rates of decay. The Kungsan people of the Kalahari, studied before significant Western dietary contact, showed similar patterns. When researchers examined their diets, the connection was clear. Very little fermentable carbohydrate. Very little food for the bacteria that destroys teeth. The mouth, left to the diet it evolved alongside, largely takes care of itself. Then everything changed. Approximately 10,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent of the modern Middle East, something began. The Neolithic Revolution. The domestication of plants. Wheat, barley, rye, emmer, einkorn. For the first time in human history, people began deliberately cultivating grain as a primary food source. And the dental record changed overnight. Not metaphorically. In archaeological terms, the shift is nearly instantaneous. Studies of Neolithic human remains from the earliest farming communities in Morocco, published in the journal PNAS, found cavity rates approaching 50% in some populations. 50%. In the skulls immediately before agriculture, in the same region, rates were under 3%. Within a few thousand years of farming, human mouths were in crisis. Researchers found evidence of severe abscesses, tooth loss, jawbone infection. The skulls of early farmers show suffering that the skulls of their hunter-gatherer ancestors simply do not. And it all traces back to grain. Grain is dense in fermentable starch. Ground grain, cooked grain, stored grain, all of it is exactly what Streptococcus mutans was built to consume. Every meal of bread or porridge was effectively a feast for the bacteria living in your mouth. And there was a second problem that made it worse. Storage. When you store grain, it ferments partially. Early agricultural communities eating stored grain were consuming partially fermented carbohydrate multiple times every day. The acid environment in their mouths barely had time to neutralize between meals. The teeth were under constant chemical attack. For 10,000 years, every generation of farming humans inherited this problem. And it got steadily worse. For most of the agricultural period, tooth decay was common but constrained. Grain was the primary culprit. Honey was available but seasonal and rare. The truly catastrophic acceleration came later. Sugar cane was cultivated in India as early as 800 BC. But for most of history it remained regional, expensive, and inaccessible to most of the world. Then the medieval sugar trade changed everything. As Arab traders brought refined sugar westward through North Africa and into Europe from around the 8th century onward, something notable happened to the teeth of the wealthy. Historical accounts document European aristocracy in the medieval period with severely blackened, decayed teeth. Queen Elizabeth I of England was famously documented with badly rotted teeth. Not despite her wealth. Because of it. Sugar was expensive. Sugar was status. And sugar was destroying the teeth of everyone who could afford it. Peasants who could not afford sugar and ate coarser, less refined diets actually had marginally better teeth in this period. A rare instance in history where poverty offered a biological advantage. But the window was about to close for everyone. The Industrial Revolution did something unprecedented to the human diet. It made refined sugar cheap. Before the 18th century, sugar was a luxury available only to the wealthy. Sugar cane plantations in the Caribbean, processed through colonial trade networks, began flooding European and American markets with affordable refined sugar from the 1700s onward. Then sugar beet cultivation in the 1800s made it even cheaper. By the early 20th century, annual sugar consumption per person in Britain had risen from near zero in the 1600s to over 100 pounds per year. The results were visible in every mouth. Military records from World War I found that the majority of British recruits had significant dental problems. Not because war damaged them. Because the diet of industrial Britain had white flour, refined sugar, processed food stripped of fiber. Every element of the industrial diet was optimized, accidentally, to feed Streptococcus mutans. By the mid-20th century, tooth decay had become so universal that dentistry became one of the most demanded medical services in the world. The cavity was no longer the exception. It was the assumption. Every person would get them. It was just a question of how many and how soon. Today, the global dental industry is worth over $160 billion per year. It is projected to grow to over $200 billion by 2030. This is an industry built almost entirely on treating a disease that did not meaningfully exist for the first 290,000 years of human history. Fluoride was introduced into public water supplies in the 1940s specifically to counteract the dietary damage being done to human teeth. Toothpaste became a daily necessity not because human teeth are naturally fragile, but because the diet surrounding them changed so dramatically that without intervention, decay was almost guaranteed. Research published in Nature Genetics traced the evolution of the oral microbiome across human history. They found that the bacteria living in human mouths shifted dramatically at two key moments. First with the introduction of agriculture, then with the Industrial Revolution. In pre-agricultural humans, the oral microbiome was diverse and relatively stable. In modern humans, it is dominated by acid-producing decay bacteria. The researchers described the modern human oral microbiome as significantly less healthy than that of Neanderthals, our evolutionary cousins, who had no toothpaste, no fluoride, and far better teeth than most people alive today. because their diet did not feed the organisms that destroy them. It is important to be precise here. Ancient humans were not immune to all dental problems. Wear was common. Teeth ground down from tough food, grit in stone-milled grain, and years of hard chewing. Abscesses occurred, particularly in older individuals. But structural decay from bacterial acid attack was rare. The evidence is consistent across populations, across continents, across time periods. Pre-agricultural humans, eating diets their biology co-evolved with, had mouths that largely functioned without intervention. The shift to agriculture was necessary. It allowed population growth that hunter-gatherer lifestyles could not support. It built the civilizations that eventually produced medicine, science, and the very research that tells us all of this. The cost was real. But it was a cost. A biological price paid for an agricultural bargain. And most of us are still paying it every time we sit in that dentist's chair. Paying for 10,000 years of grain. And 300 years of sugar. In a mouth that was designed for neither. The next time you leave a dental appointment with a cavity, consider this. Your teeth are not defective. They are not weak. They are not poorly maintained. They are Paleolithic hardware running a Neolithic diet. The enamel in your mouth evolved to handle meat, fibrous plants, nuts, and occasional natural sugar. Not 3 meals a day of refined carbohydrate. Not daily sugar in every drink, every sauce, every processed food on the shelf. For 290,000 years, no human needed a dentist. Then we invented farming. Then we invented cheap sugar. Then we invented the drill. Your cavities are not a personal failure. They're an archaeological event. Written in enamel. And like that can prevent another archaeological event. Paid for every generation since the first field of wheat was planted 10,000 years ago.